You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Haristodoulou.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to more of the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristodoulou, and today we are continuing on with the Next Man Up series, talking about the AFC North. And I decided to cover this specific division just because of some big news that obviously dropped yesterday regarding Deshaun Watson. So I figured I might as well kind of roll a little bit of that into this here. I'm not going to really spend a ton of time talking about it, but it will be something we talk about when we discuss the Browns. But make sure you comment down below. Let me know if you are a fan of any of the four teams of the AFC North: the Browns, the Bengals, the Ravens, the Steelers. Talk about them down below. Who do you expect to come up and stand out for this next season here? I'm looking at like rising stars, maybe a breakout candidate, things like that as I go through this list here, or maybe guys who have been progressing the last few years and it's time for them to really take that next step for their teams. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive into it. Now, we'll start with the Browns, and I'll touch on the Deshaun Watson stuff really quickly here. All I've got to say is really just wow. I did not expect a settlement to ultimately reach where it was. I find it a little bit fishy that it happens to be that his suspension ends the same week as they play the Houston Texans. So it is what it is. I mean, that stuff can't really write itself unless someone's doing the writing for it. So do you want to call it ironic? I don't really think there's irony there. At the end of the day, the NFL is a business. Do I agree with the suspension? I will say no. It should have been a little bit longer. I don't really know what the actual target should have been, but I don't really think that 11 games cuts it, and the $5 million fine, it seems like a lot of people are dissatisfied with it, but it is what it is. We're going to roll with it from here. We'll see what the reaction is going forward, and, come week 13, kind of how things play out, I guess. But focusing on the Browns now for the next man up situation, for someone that I have eyeballed here, and I think you Browns fans would probably agree with me, wide receiver Donovan Peoples-Jones, someone who has steadily progressed the last couple of seasons for the team, and I think is really poised and set up to be wide receiver number 2 alongside Amari Cooper, who they brought in this year. Cooper's obviously going to get a ton of attention as wide receiver 1 for the unit, whether it's going to be when Jacoby Brissett is at quarterback or when ultimately Deshaun Watson takes over. It's going to be nice to have someone like DPJ, who has brought in some really nice catches, who has had some steady production. He just had 597 yards off of 34 catches last season. He had 3 touchdowns, only 4 drops throughout the entirety of the year off of the 58 targets that went his way. I think he's showing signs of being a legit number 2 guy. I don't know if he could quite be considered someone who could evolve into a number 1, but he has definitely flashed here and there. And if I was to take a guess as to how his production turns out this year, it might not be quite as high as it would have been had Watson been the quarterback for the entirety of the season. But Jacoby Brissett, he's a serviceable guy. I'm actually a Colts fan, so I know where, Jacoby Brissett comes from and what he can do. He can be serviceable when put in the right situation, and I think there's some solid talent around him, be it with the offensive line, the running backs, and at the skill position, that I think Jacoby Jones will be serviceable until Watson comes in, and I firmly expect that DPJ ends up being a dude for the offense over there. And if someone's going to really step up for this team and be their next big piece, it's going to be him. Now, focusing on the Pittsburgh Steelers here, I think this one's a little bit easier said just because, he had such a strong rookie campaign last year, and if he does not continue to take the next step forward, whoever ends up being under center for the Steelers is going to end up having a more difficult job, and I'm looking at running back Najee Harris. Obviously, the numbers, pretty gaudy when you look at them. 307 carries. He got 1,200 yards on the dot, 7 touchdowns. He was averaging 3.9 yards a carry, which I've seen some people here and there kind of throw back and forth as like a poor mark. And then some people are like, well, yeah, almost 4 yards a carry, not that bad. And then receiving wise, this is the thing that I feel like also gets lost when you talk to like the doubters of Najee Harris, is like they reference his yards per carry, but like he had 1,200 yards on the ground. Then you look at receiving, he caught 74 receptions of the 94 targets his way. He had 467 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's averaging 6.3 yards yards of reception. I don't really know how you knock what Najee Harris did in year number 1. All things considered, with the offensive line kind of falling apart the last few years with surprise retirements and just players moving on, there are some good things to look at, though. when you listen to what offensive coordinator Matt Canada had to say, he really wants to open up the offense now that they're going to have a more athletic quarterback. And he even said it himself, it's kind of limited what he wants to do because Ben Roethlisberger was obviously not as mobile late in his career as he was during the early parts of it. So with more mobile quarterback options now in either Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, I would say probably the least of the three. Maybe you Steelers fans would argue that. I think out of all three of the quarterbacks of Kenny Pickett, Trubisky, and Rudolph, it's probably Mason Rudolph the least athletic of the three, but all three of them bring more athleticism nonetheless compared to what Roethlisberger had. Whether it be play action passes or RPOs, things like that, it's going to open things up for the running game. And then you couple that with the fact that, they doubled down on the offensive line, bringing in two key signings during this free agency, an offensive guard James Daniels from Chicago, and then center Mason Cole from Minnesota. I think that there's only room for Najee Harris to grow in the second year. Will teams be a little bit more aware of kind of what he brings to the table? Of course, but with improvements along the offensive line and the hope that, George Pickens ends up turning out really well, which it sounds like he's flashing so far in camp and in preseason, I think Najee Harris is set up to continue to elevate his game and be that dominant running back, the bell cow type of back that the Steelers want him to be. And I would be hard-pressed to believe that he really takes a step back in year number 2. Again, 1,200 yards on the ground, coupled with another 500 through the air. I mean, you can't really argue with almost 1,700 yards worth of production. I just don't really see how people sit here and doubt the ability that Harris brings to the table. He's just another Alabama back doing his thing. Now, switching gears and focusing on the Baltimore Ravens, this was one that I put a little bit more thought into, but when I finally pinpointed the guy that I really like here, it felt a little bit more obvious once I really started going through everything. And I'm looking at, for the Ravens specifically here, edge rusher Odafe Oweh. When you look at just the limited amount of snaps that he had, and I don't want to act like 555 snaps is a real limited sample size, but not quite starter numbers, for him to have come out with 5 sacks, 49 pressures, he had 22 tackles, and he was great. He was credited for 19 defensive stops altogether as a singular player. I mean, the production is there. He was a first-round selection for a reason, and I'm really excited to see him continue to grow. If there's one thing that I consistently can count on in Baltimore, it is them producing top-tier, even with guys that are struggling and still getting the most out of them, but top-tier defensive talent. And Odafe Oweh really feels like he's going to turn into that actual, that dude, that pass rusher. He's going to be seeing, if I had to guess, somewhere along the lines of 800 snaps, give or take, going into the second year. I think he's going to get more of a starting role, or seeing just more of the snaps on the defensive line in pass rushing situations, specifically just based off of how solid he looked throughout the beginning of his rookie season. I have a hard time believing that he isn't really going to evolve and take that next step here. You also couple with the fact that last season, the Baltimore Ravens secondary was completely decimated with injuries. Completely decimated. You lost you were pretty much running out practice squad guys, give or take, every week. And I always talk about on the show with one of the faster ways to upgrade your secondary is to upgrade your pass rush. Well, that does kind of go hand in hand and flip the other way as well. When your secondary is littered with guys who would not even be starting, never mind just being on, I guess I should say that the other way. Never mind even being guys that play but are actually starting, and they're practice squad guys, it's going to hurt the pass rush because they're going to have less and less time to get after the quarterback. Just like with the secondary hurting from a pass rush that's just completely ineffective, it definitely goes both ways to an extent. You could argue maybe one affects the other more, but I still think that with an improved secondary, you have guys coming back. There's also been some additions there. It's going to help out what the pass rush can do. It might give them an extra second to try to get after the quarterback and bring them down. And I mean, if we know football, it's a matter of seconds. The difference between an extra second or two rushing the passer ultimately can decide whether it's a pressure or an actual sack and takedown of the quarterback. So I like what Odafe Oweh brings to the team. I love him as a player. I think he is a standout guy, and I have, again, no doubts in my mind that this is someone who couldn't notch 10 sacks going into this next season and maybe up his pressure rate another 10 to 15 or so minimum. And then focusing on the AFC's Super Bowl representative, the Cincinnati Bengals, this was one on the defensive side that I talked about him quite a bit last year, And because I talked about the middle of the secondary and just the middle of the defense per se, not just the secondary, but the middle of the defense over the top a lot. Because while the Bengals defense really started to look good towards the back half of the season and through that playoff stretch run that they made, the middle of the defense, when it came to covering passes and things like that over the middle, struggled at times. And I am actually a very big fan of Logan Wilson, their linebacker, and the reason why I'm targeting him as the next man up is because I think he's going to continue to progress. There were a couple hiccups here and there where he was allowing, 5-6 catches a game and, 50 some odd yards. He had the horrendous game against the Jets where he was picked on for 190 yards. I believe he was targeted 14 times and caught 12, and I think 12 receptions were caught on him in that game. The Jets and Mike White completely took him apart in coverage, and they attacked him again and again and again. I do believe, though, that had to have been a learning experience because that happened and his production was fairly solid from that point onward. And that was quite a wake-up call for somebody who has been labeled like an emerging coverage linebacker in the league. He had 4 interceptions last year. He's no slouch. I will say, again, focusing on just kind of locking down your coverage and helping you take that next step into the more upper echelon of coverage linebackers, the Shaquille Leonards of the league, the Fred Warners of the league. If you want to push into that stratosphere or even just get up into that conversation, you got to lock things down a little bit better when it comes to coverage of this new age linebacker that we're seeing here. And I think Logan Wilson has the athleticism and the ability to bring that. I think he is the next man up for the Bengals defense. And if he can just clean up the receptions, he allowed 83.6% completion percentage coming his way. If he can just clean that up, lower that number, get it into like the mid-70s, get your hand in between the pass and the wide receiver's hands a few more times a game, and just tighten up the coverage, like I've said a few times here, I firmly believe he is going to take that next step. And he's already well on his way. I don't doubt his ability. I just want to see him clean up some things, get a little bit more sound in coverage, a little bit more aware of what's going on and around him and who's running by him and behind him. And I firmly believe that he can make the step. I mean, he had 70 tackles last year. He was, a forced fumble, a sack. He had 26 defensive stops. He has all the numbers. He has all the ability. He's just got to clean some things here and there up. And then you can solidify the middle of that defense there. And what appears to already be a rising group, again, based off the second half of that season, he can be that centerpiece, that guy, that potentially even that play caller, the guy who, with the potential of Jesse Bates not being around further than this next season here, and that's if, cross your fingers and hope it doesn't happen, but if the Bengals end up losing him at some point during the season because of a trade or something like that, he can be that guy. And I firmly believe in him. I just want to see him clean it up. That's all I'm looking for. But I really like his play style. I like what he brings to the table for this team, and I think that he is a strong candidate for being that next man up on the Cincinnati Bengals defense. But that is my next man up series for the AFC North. Again, I would love to hear what you guys think about each and every single one of these teams, or if you're just a fan of one of the teams, who do you think is next up on these units that is going to stand out and be the team's next big piece, whether it's on the offense or the defensive side? Let me know. But I appreciate you all for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good weekend. I'll catch you guys later.